Hands up if you like lots and lots of massive numbers. I'm kidding, I know it's all of you. Hello, my fellow sorcerers, and welcome to what can only be described as the coolest build since Frozen Orb, which I realised was, not that long ago, but we move. And that is, of course, my take on Season 4 Blizzard Ice Spikes. And I really can't stress enough how incredible they are now, thanks to, well, tempering and us literally just having a plus hundreds and hundreds of % damage to both ice spikes and cold damage in general, on top of a few other neat synergies that are really pushing this forward. Make no mistake, there doth not exist a higher pure DPS build for Sorcerer than this, at least in a general sense. There's a couple of niche little super ultra stat breakpoint crazy requirements shenanigans we might be able to pull off later in the season, and we will get to them, but generally speaking, this is the way to go when you're doing anything difficult. You are near immortal while stood in your Blizzard, which is really helpful in the pit. And talking of the pit, yeah, this is your pit pusher. In terms of speed farming, pure speed farming, Frozen Orb reigns supreme, but it does struggle with high health enemies, especially bosses, and especially bosses scale ridiculously high, ridiculously quickly in the pit. That's where Blizzard comes in. Though, don't get me wrong, it's still ridiculously quick cleaving through the mobs. You need to put a couple blizzards on each pack, maybe 3-4 in elite pack, and then you just move on and watch them die. It hard CCs everything that you put it on, both from the freeze itself and from some tempers that we'll be doing, and it's just this cool global lockdown while everything gets exploded by ridiculously fast million damage per pop ice spikes that are just exploding everywhere. This is also your tormented level 200 boss killing build, it's your Lilith killing build, hell, it's your farming just normal Duriel and Dariel for Uber Uniques build. It really is the way to go when we just want a health bar to deplete as fast as humanly possible, and that's what we care about, which is why I need to share it. If you're running through Helltide, play Frozen Orb. If you're doing endgame activities, play Blizzard. That's the kind of baseline where we're at. And there's a fair amount of variations that we can take with Blizzard. It's quite skill point light, and that gives us some flexibility, and I will of course share my thoughts on said options when we get to them. So, talking about getting to them, let's get into this then. This is the build that I have been pushing the pit with. I'm on tier 70 as of the time of me saying this. I will likely be much higher by the time you're watching this, and it really has just been cruise control comfy in a way that no other build really has. You really do feel the master of the situation, especially on the bosses where things get a little bit ridiculous with like one-shot death effects going everywhere across the screen, clown show fiesta, what is happening? This still maintains control, as you can see. So without further ado then, skill tree for thee. 2 points into your firebolt, as it is written, and always it shall be. To the enchantment slot it goes for that burning synergy, the crit, the Paragon, and all of the massive amounts of damage this little firebolt brings. Over to your core, where we put 5/5 into Frozen Orb, take it to enhanced and then greater. It becomes a valuable source of both extra damage and vulnerable, and we want to put it in the second enchantment slot, and that's all nice and tidy. Over to our defensives, where we want just Flame Shield, we don't need the heal. Then we get Teleport for the zippy zip alongside the DR. 3 out of 3 into Glass Cannon, we're very tanky, this is a huge amount of damage, too much to ignore. Then we get Ice Armor, we take it to enhanced, the mana regen is nice, as is the cooldown lowering, and we just get a lot of barrier uptime, which means a lot of you can't die uptime, and also a lot of barrier synergy aspect uptime, like Conceited, like Storm Swell. 1 rank into Elemental Tumors, relevant, just so the resets can happen. We are critting a lot here, and then over to the conjuration side of things. We get 1 into a line, 3/3 into protection, and 3/3 into mana shield, constant big barriers, and constant big damage reduction. 3 out of 3 into the lucky hit, though we will get back to this, but we have a decently large amount of lucky hit effects that this comes in handy, and as I said, we're very skill tree light here, and we have lots of options. Then we want to get ourselves Lightning Spear and take it to Invoked. This serves a few purposes. The Lightning Spear going around stunning everyone keeps us alive. The Lightning Spear going around doing lightning damage at range means we can trigger Lightning's Talrasha without having to teleport onto a dangerous pack of elites' face. And it gives us an extra source of vulnerable uptime. It's just really nice to have and rounds everything off. Then we get the Blizzard. We only need 1 rank of it. The damage isn't coming from the Blizzard, it's coming from the Ice Spikes aspect. Take it to Enhanced, and then Mages, so it lasts that 4 seconds longer. Devouring Blaze is next up, 3 out of 3 there for that lovely crit damage. And then we head over here, get your Deep Freeze. I like to have this on my bars just as the emergency button, especially while pit pushing. Just sitting safe in here for 4 seconds while your Blizzard does the work to avoid a load of random one-shot Lilith dropping on the pit boss. It's just ridiculous. It's really clutch to have, though truthfully you can put this point and have your last move here be anything you want, but I do recommend Deep Freeze. Then we want 3/3 in Permafrost, 3/3 in Icy Touch, 3/3 in Hoarfrost. We will come back to Frigid Breeze, but these trio is just huge damage. Then we go over to our key passive, where again we don't need Avalanche because we don't need the mana help and we don't need the Blizzard itself to do more damage. And for general gameplay, until we get to like 100 tier plus pit, we don't need the extra shatter explosion damage from this, and indeed this doesn't help on bosses anyway. What does help is just having a consistent 20% damage reduction, and it'll be 25% most of the time from Teleport and Lightning Spear, so this is really good to have. This essentially is just, I take 25% less damage, the key passive, which actually is really good. Now, as I said, the skill points are quite flexible. So what I would do, and what I do actually run with, and would recommend you do this swap too, once your gear is good enough that you primarily don't need this to help with your mana retention, well, get rid of Frigid Breeze, and then because of that, we don't really need the extra lucky hit, honestly, so we can get rid of Precision, and then we can also take a point out of Protection, as 2 out of 3 is more than enough. At that point, we can get full Icy Veil for 24% longer barriers, which is very nice, and then we can come down here and get Coursing Currents, and then either, if you're doing difficult content with very hard-hitting enemies, take Electrocution for the extra DR coming from your Teleport and your Lightning Spear, or if you are farming and just want to go quick and also have more crit chance and do a little bit more damage, well then Conduction is the way to go from the move speed, again from your Teleport and Lightning Spear crits. So that is our talent tree. Next up then, let's talk gear. You want to have a Wand and Focus. Now technically Wand versus Dagger isn't a huge decision here. The lucky hit's nice but not super necessary, and the extra close damage from the Dagger is nice, but a lot of the time you will be quite far away from the enemies you're blizzarding down. With end bosses you will stand on top of them a lot of the time, so the close can come in handy, but it's so tiny. Just choose whichever you have the better affixes on. And if you are wondering why not a staff when we can 2 times the glacial aspect for the spikes, well, with them removing attack speed as an affix on staffs, which is really sad, it's just not worth it over the flexibility of one hand and focus. That said, with perfect gear, ultra endgame, super deep masterworking on everything, it is looking like it might just be viable to go back to a staff, and you can make up the attack speed and primarily the cooldown reduction loss of not having a focus especially, but that is way down the line and most of us will probably never get there. So generally speaking, yeah, one hand and focus. Aspects-wise then, we want Storm Swell for the extra vulnerable damage with a barrier. The enemies will always be vulnerable. This is a huge increase. And Conceited, our other big barrier damage increase. I have still not found a better Conceited than 12%. I don't understand. In any case, we then get the star of the show. Make sure this goes on your necklace so it gets 1.5 times. It is glacial to make your blizzard summon those ice spikes that explode everywhere and do the delicious damage. Then we want ourselves frozen tundra, so they explode in a 50% larger radius. Without this, the DPS is just too inconsistent, so make sure it happens. And then lastly, we want inner calm. We want this primarily for boss damage. A lot of the time, you will just be stood on the spot, stacking blizzards, not moving anywhere, cycling through your barriers, and you will trigger it up to its maximum amount, which is a huge, just raw 30% multiplicative damage increase, and it works wonders, especially because we're so tanky while stood in our blizzard. We really can just afford to camp out here and take full advantage. That said, if you are doing easier content, if you're doing lower pits, if you're doing nightmare dungeons or helltide, you can very much get away by dropping this ring and instead putting X-Files on. You gotta remember that Blizzard is a dot, according to the game, and we're also applying the Firebolt dot from our enchantment, which means we can get pretty consistent big pops of damage that will hit very, very hard from an X-Files. It's not super worth it when we're pushing later pits, because against a single target boss, you will get more damage out of the extra inner calm aspect, but for just general cleaving through random trash, yeah, this can be quite fun, and it's worth mentioning. Then, on the defensive side of things, we want Ever-Living, as enemies will always be vulnerable, and this is a nice chunk of DR, and then Snow Guards, as we'll pretty much always be stood in our blizzard, and 30% less damage for doing so is huge. So this is why this is so tanky. 30% here, another 25% here, we have another 25% from our key passive, we have 24% from Mana Shield, it just keeps going and going and going, and we are really hard to kill, especially on top of all the barriers and the extra DR from our Paragon tree, which we will get to. We also, as you see, don't need any unique helmet or chest, though technically I guess you'd pop Shaco on if you did have it. In any case, unique-wise, the ever-reliable Tal Rashes. Get this, get a good one, get it masterworked, you'll be using it in every build forever. It's a beautiful item and ridiculous damage increase. We want Esu's Heirloom, we want as much crit, strike, chance, and damage as possible, so this is perfect. Tybalt's Will, I would recommend not doing Blizzard until you have Tybalt's Will, because the mana gain from going unstoppable from both your teleport and your flame shield is too much to ignore. You essentially keep going until you're out of mana, and then teleport, now you're full, keep going until you're out of mana, flame shield, now you're full, and you keep cycling like that, and you will get plenty of enough blizzards. It's only really a factor on bosses, everything else dies from too few blizzards from mana to matter, but it is important on said bosses. So, that is that. Gem-wise, get your extra crit damage in your weapons, and then you want armor in your jewelry. Now, I don't have the royal versions of them yet, because they require a ridiculous amount of fragments, so I am not quite at the 9,200 cap, but I will be once these 3 skulls do upgrade rather perfectly. So make sure you are at the 9,250-ish mark, and that this says 85%. Your armor, however, is a more interesting decision. Health is just good generically, but we do have just raw int. The reason why we might choose that is more int is more damage, but also more int for us exponentially is much more resist, and we want to have all our resists at 70%. Now, I'm missing 1.1% on 2 of them, which will get from Paragon when I upgrade a glyph a couple more times, but maintaining that balance is very, very important. Technically, until I upgrade that glyph, which will cover this, I could swap this health gem for another intelligence, or make this the plus 100 intelligence one, but again, don't have 10,000 fragments, and then I would be at 70%. So you kind of have to play it depending on your own personal gear. Just make sure you've got the full 70, and make sure you've got the 9,200. So, affix-wise then, the most important one that you can get is cooldown reduction wherever possible. Then you want critical strike chance wherever possible. Then you want ranks to either Hoarfrost or Devouring Blaze, and then you want attack speed. After that, you can't go wrong with just a little bit of intelligence or critical strike damage, just general damage uppers past those core 4, and then lucky hit isn't the worst, but is certainly the least desirable. Then defensively on our chest and helmet, again, you kind of have to play this with your personal gear situation. I have to have the plus armor on the chest or I won't make the cap, but you might be in a different way. But what you definitely want on both the chest and the helmet is the plus mana per second. It makes a huge difference multiplied up with your resource generation. After that, again, raw intelligence, you really can't go wrong, as you can't with health. So, when we look at our stats then, what we're aiming for, as I say, is as much critical strike chance as possible, along with as much critical strike damage as possible. The damage comes from your Paragon mainly, but this is really, I am very happy with it. We get an extra 20% from the stalagmite glyph that we'll get to, so 70% crit chance on my ice spikes. Yeah, I like that a lot. This should be about 25%. I really need one more good solid roll of it, and then when it comes to your cooldown reduction, you want just as much as you can get. Specifically, this lucky hit chance on my focus should be cooldown reduction, but I have poured about 50 million gold into it and not managed to roll it yet, so lovely. And then finally, this was lucky hit on my necklace, but it became cooldown reduction, and now this is pretty perfect. That's all said and done. Let's talk tempering. When it comes to the weapons, what you want is elemental surge, and you want specifically chance to deal either poison or shadow damage, and you want one of these on both your main hand and focus. The reason for this is it will just permanently keep up maximum stacks of Rashes, and that's honestly the best use for it on ice spikes, as we don't really gain anything from frost shock or pyromancy augments. Then, when it comes to offensive, generally speaking, you want ice spike damage, of course, wherever you can get it. However, if we go to our Paragon to skip ahead just a little bit, we will, of course, be using the Frigid Fate board for that legendary node. Here, it's capped at 30% multiplicative, and it comes from bonus damage with cold damage. You want this to be at 30%. So if it's not at 30% when you're finished with your Paragon board and your gear, well then what you want to choose on your tempering here is Frost Finesse pure cold damage. Like I have on my ring here, plus 50% cold damage, that is there to finish that legendary node to cap. So always ice spike damage once your cold damage is enough to make Frigid Fate 30%. Then on the defensive side of things, it depends what you need to top up any resist or to get any armor that you're missing, and then maximum life is always good. Flame Shield duration is also quite nice, and you can do some quite cheesy things with that we'll talk about in the future, but that's all well and good there. Over to utility, what we want is Worldly Fortune. You want essentially any of them is fine, except slow. Get Immobilize, Stun, and Freeze, and then your Blizzard will do just that, and it's just super more lockdown, but more importantly, it is much faster stagger on bosses, and stagger on bosses is how we kill them when we're pushing higher pits. We have to get so much damage in that stagger period. So, over to mobility, just movement speed is fine, and then resource, we want ourselves worldly stability and resource generation specifically. On your necklace, we want to have ice spike damage and said resource generation, an offensive and resource slot. So when it comes to operating this build, a couple pointers. Always be try and stud in your Blizzard so you get the extra DR for doing so. Just as a general thing to maintain, treat it like you're creating a path for yourself to walk through so you don't die. Other than that, just stack Blizzards on the boss. Whenever you need mana, teleport. Whenever you need mana, Flame Shield. unless you don't need the teleport for just moving quickly, and you don't need the flame shield for not dying. They are either the intended purpose, or they're your mana buttons, and you kind of have to play it by ear depending on what's happening. But general rotation is to just stand here stacking, use your lightning spear on cooldown, teleport when you're about to run out of mana, flame shield when you're about to run out of mana, use ice shield on cooldown, hop into your ice block, immediately leave for another full mana restore, teleport because I'm about to run out of mana, lightning spears off cooldown, and then ice shields off cooldown, and it just goes on and on and on, generally pressing things as they come up, but with a little bit of deliberacy relative to your current mana situation. And it is very, very mana hungry stacking blizzards, and that's why we do need these mana per second rolls on our defensive gear. Past that, you just kinda, well, run around putting stacks on groups of enemies. You see a normal group of enemies, 1, 2, move on. You see a group of elites, 1, 2, 3, move on. Grab another one, move on, and just so on and so forth. Just kind of lead around the place, stacking up blizzards on everything that you walk past, and you'll kind of just start looking like this through the dungeon, using your defensives whenever you need to, or if there's a huge group of elites. Like if I was looking at them and it's 5 big dangerous looking elites, well, I would start stacking at range, teleport in, put my flame shield on, stack a load more, and then just leave, and then that would be enough to kill them all. So, let's get Paragon-y. I am indeed very, very happy with this one. Another very precisely balanced one, especially with the amount of all resist nodes I've taken to perfectly get to 70% while taking points. So make sure when you do it, you still do end up at those 70% barriers, and that's important. If you're way off, then sacrifice 4 points somewhere to get resilience, because those caps are the most important thing. But I've got it where I've got it, and this is where I've got it. Head up and through Elementalist to the glyph slot where we will find Elementalist. Get it all activated with the intelligence and have it nicely buff, balance, and erudite. Going up through balance this time and into Enchantment Master. Sadly, not enough spare points to get to the other Elementalist, but we do end up at Ruinous. But first and foremost, head over to this willpower, up, grab Elemental Balance, over to the glyph slot where Reinforced finds its usual home, buffing these 2 rares, and then get them in question. Erudite, there we go. Activate it with the willpower, and then up to said Ruinous. Head right from this willpower into the Burning Instinct board, which is again where you usually find it, going straight down to the glyph slot where Destruction again finds its usual home, and get every single bit of dexterity we can in the whole place. We want all the crit damage we can get. Grab Cinders, head down here for Smoldering Embers, but mainly, honestly, the crit that's behind it. Poke up here with just a quick little point investment for Kindling, it's very much worth it, and then head down into our next board, which is said Frigid Fate. Go down like this, go to this Intelligence, make sure the guarded node is in the top right here, and then straight down through this Dexterity to this node where we will find Tactician for that 10% multiplicative on defensive, which is just always up. It also nicely buffs the vulnerable damage we're getting from weakness. But firstly, head straight down to Chilling just to get the dex to activate this glyph, then over to said weakness. Detour from this dex down to Frigid Fate, and then over to this willpower where we go up for Guarded, a nice bit of DR, and then we move into the next board, which is going to be your Elemental Summoner. Arrange it so that Keeper of the Elements is right here in line with Guarded, and we're going to go take a detour to grab it. The resist and the non-physical is lovely. Then we continue on to the glyph slot by going specifically through Erudite here, straight to the glyph where we get Stalagmite for that 20% crit chance on your ice spikes. That is so lovely. Continue on to Conjurer to activate said Stalagmites, and then straight down and left through this Intelligence, which will finish activating it, and then move on to your next board. This board exists just to activate another glyph, path, so head to the slot, make sure the glyph slot is in the top right like this, and then heading down through the dexterity to activate Flame Feeder for the extra 10% multiplicative. Grab the one dex to the right, and then exit via these two decks, which will activate it, and then into the next board. Nope, not the final board even yet. This is your Searing Heat. We want the glyph in the bottom left, and then we want to head straight down via here through this dex. Make sure you get ashes so you can then get this dex, and then we head to the glyph slot where control is. Enemies will always be chilled or frozen, bosses will be during their down state. It's a big increase, and then we continue straight right through these two decks to activate it to this willpower, and then down into now our final board, which, as you might guess, is our Icefall. Arrange it like this, so Cryomancy is in the top right, and we want to head towards it like so, getting the free cold damage. Remember, this feeds into our Frigid Fate, which is miles away. Goddamn, this is a really strung out Paragon board, but believe me, it is very, very good. And then get Cryomancy and nicely end up with Icefall. Oh, there we have it. Honestly, it's just so nice to see. And there you have it. My take on Ice Spikes in Season 4, and I am very, very pleased with it. It's been great pushing the pit. It's felt super comfortable. It is powerful. It is safe. And all around, it is a great time. I love stacking up blizzards and just seeing those numbers rain, and I hope you do too. If you have any requests for the next builds, then do let me know, but I assure you, we will essentially be covering every viable skill the Sorcerer has in a lot of combinations, with some hybrids, a few out there concepts, and we'll see some that might not even work, but they will be fun. Oh, Season 4, loving it. For now then, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.